Can you see that? I lost the clip, so I'm using this miniature clothes peg. If you're wondering if that is a professional audio miniature clothes peg, definitely. Hey, Matt Allaby here. We're in Ideal Noise Studios, and today if you want to join me, we're going to take a look at how I mixed music cues composed by The Flight and Christoph Bauschinger for Joe Cornish's Lockwood Co, which as I record this video is the #1, global #1 show on Netflix. Let's take a look. So first thing you're going to notice here is Ableton. Why Ableton? Why not Pro Tools? Well, could have used Pro Tools, but coming from an electronic music production background, I'm just way quicker with Ableton, and this project was all about speed. There was a ton of music cues to do, not a lot of time to do them. There's also, Ableton's got a couple of other things that it does really, really well, which made it suitable for this project. One of them is how it exports. The idea was to start with 6 groups of sounds, and then I would export 6 stems. Those 6 stems could then be taken to the final mix, and then there's some leeway with the levels between those instrument groups. So if the drums need to build at some point, or strings need to swell, or something needs to duck out of the way of some dialogue, they had the ability to do that. Ableton can export these in quite a neat way. First, name the groups exactly how you want the stems to be named. Then select all of the groups. In the export menu, choose selected tracks only. Then the trick is to give no name for the exported track. I just use an underscore. And there you go, you get the 6 groups bounced perfectly to 6 stems with the right names. So I decided to approach this mix from the top down. Normally that would mean starting on the main bus, but seeing as we're exporting 6 individual groups, I started on the groups themselves, applying processing there first, and then, if needed, going to the individual tracks to see if there was any level balancing or EQ needed on those. Let's take a look at some of the plugins that I had on the template. There's quite a lot of plugins here. I prefer to process in that way. I think you can get away with it with hardware, doing a lot of work on 1 or 2 boxes. With software though, I find it way more transparent to use many plugins, often in parallel, with each one doing a small amount of processing. That way you can subtly build up this sonic picture bit by bit until finally you're happy with what you have. So the CL1B, Christoph had this on his groups in the rough mix. It sounds great. It's not the fastest compressor in the world, so if there was something really dynamic, like the drums for example, I used this, the 2K5 model, DMG audio. Really fast, really punchy, and that did most of the legwork, and then I could use the tube tech after it to catch the peaks essentially. Most of the hard work with the EQ was done with the Pro Q. The dynamic band's fantastic. So you can pick out the frequencies, the harsh frequencies you don't like, really crush those down, and then you could use an overall band, a quite wide bell, to say, raise that overall frequency area back in, create the definition you need without all that harshness coming from those ringing frequencies. Also, if you get to an area of the track where those frequencies aren't present, like here for example, the dynamic bands return to 0, and therefore whatever in the sound at that, on the track at that moment is not being processed, so it's super transparent. Next up was saturation, and I'm totally obsessed with saturation. It's the sound of recorded music to me. All I had to do was add small amounts of saturation, almost like I was hitting a preamp or a mixing desk stage, just to add a little bit of life, a little bit of 3-dimension. The first one I used was the SSL vintage drive from the Fusion. I actually have the hardware Fusion down there in the rack. I couldn't use it on this project because I would have needed 6 of them, 1 for each group. Occasionally on the drum channels, I would use a tape. Slate Digital was good for that, just to get some of that tape saturation on the transients. And then if needed some sort of tube sound, I use this one, the HD2, just this Pento tube. And again, the mix on all of these is 20%, if that. Unlike many of the music cues in Lockwood, I was given 1 drum track for this. Most of the other cues might have had 15, 20 different percussion elements. This one was just 1, and I think it's Christoph just bashing away on the real drum kit, the live drum kit. And it's very, very raw, so that really allowed me to just go to town on it. Let's take a listen to what I was given and then what we ended up with first. So here's the raw drum kit. And here's what we ended up with. So clearly it's a lot louder, but the perceived volume is a lot louder. Actually, if we take a look at the meter, when we play it with no processing, we're actually peaking around -10. When I put the processing on, we're only gaining 2 decibels on the meter, but the perceived volume is massively increased. We've got a lot more crispness, a lot more punch. We've removed some of that kind of cardboard boxiness, and the whole thing is just more present, more even. So let's take all of these off, and we'll put one in one by one and see how we got there. Well, the track comp straight away is bringing the drums together. 4 dB of gain reduction, but it's only really hitting on those big tom and kick hits. Let's hear it without and with. The Pro Q just bringing down some of the resonances. Had some saturation stages here. Then Spectre, bringing out some mid, some top, and some of that bass. I really wanted to feel those toms. They just sounded a little kind of cardboardy and woody, and I wanted them to have some welly behind them. Let's hear it without. And with. Next up was the BX EQ. Again, bass, adding 3.5 dB down at around 60 Hertz. Just need to get more bass out of those toms. Let's hear it without. And with. Yeah, that's more like it. And it's got these little controls called sheen and glow. I don't know what they do, but I don't think Brainworks or AMEC wanted you to know what they do, right? Otherwise they wouldn't have called them sheen and glow. So you just press them. If they sound good, they sound good. Soothe, then I used, this would have been for the cymbals. This is really, really great at taking out some of those harsh resonances from the cymbals. Again, mix at 60. Plugins like this, you really don't want to do too much with. Some of those bottom end hits were a little uncontrolled. So I just wanted to rein the bottom end in so the kick and the toms didn't sort of push out too much. And I used the multiband to do that, the Pro MB. And you can see here it's just working on the kick and the tom area. And it's barely doing 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction. Some of these final processes would have been done after I'd then gone through the other groups, made the guitars and everything else nice and loud and present, come back to the drums and realize we can just now push them a little bit more just to get them on top. It's really important with this cue that the drums were pounding and present. So for that, the final thing I added was this standard clip. And this is what gives it the real volume. I'm clipping, also adding this soft clip saturation here. And you'll really hear this on the transients of the toms. You can hear the crunch really hitting home. And obviously it gives us that loudness as well, which allows us then to push over the rest of the instruments without us going into the red. Let's hear it without first. So you can see that we're pushing -2, turn on the standard clip. And we get a much louder perceived volume, but then if we look on the actual meter, we've gone down to -8. Let's hear those in the mix. Big wall of noise there. Nothing says fighting ghosts like screeching guitars and pounding drums. I hope you found this useful or entertaining. You can follow the links below for more information. Find us at idealnoise.com. Bye. See ya. I just realized I didn't figure out how to do a sign off.